Senator Gorton.
Mr. Chair, the phrase Office of Emergency Management is somewhat of a misnomer, is it not? You worked on training, on coordination and the like, but when you got to WTC-1, you were not managing the incident, were you? You did not have command authority over the police or the fire department personnel there.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And the Office of Emergency Management serves a variety of roles, as you said, planning, training, right, practicing, but there's also the execution role. And at the Trade Center, it was my job and my responders at all the various command posts to make sure that the fire incident commander had everything that he needed. If he had a question, he could turn to us and we would find out the information. The same with the police incident commander. And our job was to make sure that if they needed anything and there was a coordination issue, we could do that. OEM should be invisible. OEM should be there so that the incident commander does not have to worry about extrinsic things beyond what their mission is during that mission.
Now, in your testimony, however, you said that OEM is seldom the incident commander. Are there circumstances under which it is incident commander?
There are circumstances, very rarely and remotely. When you have a citywide or a area-wide blackout, the OEM Emergency Operations Center becomes the central command center. The utilities are there. You're able to deal with them. The levels of different issues that you're dealing with is such that it spreads over all the agencies. Each individual agency is responsible for what they do. I would never, ever consider that OEM would tell the police department, you do it this way. What we would tell the police department, we need this done. And that's the role of OEM. I'll give you an example. At a major water main break, while we're not the incident commander, technically it's the Department of Environmental Protection. But the Department of Environmental Protection's expertise is shutting down the water and getting it restored. It's not getting the schools in the area relocated. It's not transportation. It's not an evacuation of buildings. It's not in perimeter control. So in those instances, OEM would take that role as the incident commander and work with the other agencies, and each of them would do what they're supposed to do.
And you think that the functions that you've outlined are the appropriate functions for OEM?
Absolutely. I think that you have to remember my background. I spent 28 years in the fire department, starting as a dispatcher in communications. I spent 4 years at the police department. So I have a real wide breadth of knowledge and understanding, not only of what the departments do, but of the culture. And, you know, you talk about the competition of police and fire. Well, you know, everybody who knows me, I always talk about my 5 sons. You know, there are days that they're great together. You don't have to do anything. They're having a wonderful time. But there are days that they get that burr that you don't know what's causing it, but they can't deal with each other. And it takes an outside person just to put them back on track and back out and get out of their way. I've seen that. These are the proudest agencies of public safety in the world. They are the best agencies of public safety in the world. I've seen them literally walk through fire. I've seen guys like Joe Vigiano that Bernie spoke about, who I know, and I knew his father very well, John Vigiano, who was a retired fire captain. There's a lot of pride. But sometimes you get the occasional, as your staff said, the occasional knucklehead that can create a problem. And that's where OEM is very good. Low profile, neutral, able to get things back on course, back out of the way and get the job done.
Thank you. Commissioner Carrick.
Yes, sir.
One of the truly agonizing elements of the presentation this morning had to do with 911. The only way for many of the civilians, most of the civilians, to have any communication. And yet 911 didn't know what to tell them to do. Some imaginative ones later on said, yeah, do get out of the building, even though that wasn't policy. Was there anyone in September of 2001 in the police department in charge of having some kind of overall view of what was going on and communicating that with 911 people so that 911 people could provide up-to-date and valuable information to people who called in?
There is a 9/11 supervisor that's on duty around the clock with each shift or each tour. And I'm sure there was a 9/11 supervisor there on that day. Whether there was communications from the field to that 9/11 supervisor, I personally don't know if there was communications. And I'm sure, I think this is something your staff is looking at now.
Okay, do you know whether there's been any change since September 11th, 2001?
No, sir, I do not, and I think Commissioner Kelly could probably address that.
Commissioner Von Essen, 911 was not a part of the fire department, but did the fire department on September 11th, 2001 have any institutionalized way, any formal way of communicating what was going on to the best of their knowledge with 911 so that 911 people could properly advise those who were calling in frantically asking for advice?
Institutionally, I really don't know what you mean.
Well, was there
Advice-
someone in the fire department whose duty it was to see that 911 was kept up to date?
The fire department dispatchers or the 911 is two different centers. You know, if you understand
No,
how
I
it
just
works.
want to know whether there was someone in the fire department whose duty it was to tell 911 supervisors in another entity what was going on so that those 911 operators could properly advise people who called in. Was that a fire department function?
I would believe that the supervising dispatcher would be responsible for doing the best he could in that area.
Do you know whether or not that kind of communication was in fact taking place on that
I
morning?
have no idea.
Mr. Gorton, if I may, the one thing I left out, and I think this is something that should be looked at, there is a 9/11 supervisor on every tour, as I indicated. Those supervisors also monitor every frequency. So, for example, the Special Operations Division frequency, which consists of the Harbor Unit, Aviation, the Emergency Services personnel, that frequency is monitored by that supervisor that's on duty. So
Are they
people,
monitoring fire department frequencies as well?
I cannot say, sir.
I can tell you, sir, that normally they wouldn't. You know, coming from a communications background, the procedures within the fire dispatch center, fire dispatchers receive a significant amount of training on how to handle calls from persons in distress in a high-rise fire. There are basic principles that they follow. 9/11 operators also have a standard procedure for giving information on a high-rise fire. Whether they had available to them immediate updates, I couldn't tell. The fire department would...
It seems to me you just told me, did you not, that the 911 supervisor would not normally be tuned into fire department frequencies?
No, you have to remember that they would be... The amount of activity, the frenetic activity in terms of communications, both in the police department and in the fire department, was exponential from what normally happens. When you listen to those radio tapes, the people in the field and the people in the communications offices were dealing with numbers of transmissions, radio transmissions, that in my years in public safety, I have not heard. The sheer amount of activity, where people were stepping on each other, they're trying to deal with each agency's response and activities.
I understand that, but I'm more troubled now than when I began this series of questions. There is no one then or now at 911 who is just regularly assigned to listen to all or as many communications, both from the police department and fire department as possible, in order that the 911 operators can pass that information on to victims? Is that what you're saying?
I can't tell you.
No one has that duty?
I can't tell you I think, as Commissioner Carrick said, you'd have to ask Commissioner Kelly.
Mr. Gordon, I think the answer for today is you have to ask Commissioner Kelly and Commissioner Scoppetta. You have to ask, you have to ask them what's going on today.
All right, but I'm
I
asking
can't
you what
answer
was,
that.
I'm asking the two of you what was going on September 11,
On
2001.
You're going to run out of time if you continue.
On September 11th, there was a supervisor in 911. That supervisor has the ability to monitor SOD's radios for the NYPD. Whether that supervisor was listening to the fire department radio, I cannot say. I know your investigators are looking at it. I cannot say.
Okay. But that supervisor didn't have the duty to do so. Only had the duty to be on police frequencies.
That may be the case.